Inside Attica, the story of the most feared inmate in New York. If you want more untold crime stories that pull you straight into the darkness of real-world danger, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story might be the one you never forget. Attica Correctional Facility always felt like a living machine. Metal doors breathing in and out, alarms echoing like a heartbeat, and tension thick enough to taste. But on a cold October morning, that machine stuttered. At 5:42 a.m., a correctional officer was found unconscious near the entrance to D Block, his radio smashed beside him, and a single word written on the hallway wall in dust, BOO. The officers knew exactly who it referenced. Jerome "Boo" Boyd. The name carried weight inside Attica, like an unspoken rule. He wasn't the biggest, the loudest, or the most violent inmate, but he was the one everyone listened to, especially when they didn't want to. For years, rumors swirled about how Boo controlled the yard without ever lifting a hand. How he knew things before they happened. How even the most hardened prisoners stepped aside when he walked by. But now something had shifted. An officer down meant a breach of control, and at Attica, control was everything. Deputy Warden Pierce arrived at the scene with a team of investigators, his face stern but unreadable. He crouched beside the fallen officer, examined the cracked radio, then lifted his eyes to the dust-written message. "Bring me Boyd," he said quietly. Now, the response from D Block was immediate. Inmates were locked down, searched, questioned. But Jerome Boyd wasn't pacing in his cell or sitting on his bunk. He was standing perfectly still, hands behind his back, waiting as if he already knew they were coming for him. "Morning, Deputy," he said calmly. "Didn't expect visitors so early." Pierce studied him. Boo's expression was relaxed, but his eyes held something cold, something calculating. He didn't look anxious. He didn't look threatened. He looked prepared. "You want to tell me why your name is written next to an unconscious officer?" Pierce asked. Boo shrugged slightly. "I don't write on walls." That was all. No explanation. No denial. No fear. They took him to interrogation anyway. 2 investigators questioned him for hours. Boo spoke little, revealing nothing. Not about the officer. Not about the message. Not about the tension quietly growing inside the prison over the past few weeks. Because something had been brewing. Contraband trades gone wrong. Whispered deals between rival groups. A sudden shift in who controlled certain hallways and shared areas. Officers noticed. Inmates noticed. Who noticed most of all. But there was one person who noticed more, Officer Raymond Keller, the same guard found unconscious. Keller had spent the last month gathering information about an unauthorized power network forming inside Attica. He never reported the names he found, but he did report one detail. Whoever was organizing the movement had ties to both old and new inmates, something nearly impossible in a place ruled by strict lines. Now Keller was unconscious, and no one knew whether he fell, was pushed, or was silenced. By noon, investigators searched his locker. Hidden behind neatly folded uniforms was a small notebook wrapped in plastic. Page after page was filled with scribbles, coded markings, dates, initials, and small notes connecting inmates across different blocks. But one page stood out. A circled date. A name underlined twice. Boyd D Block, incoming shift change. Deputy Pierce stared at it for a long moment. If Keller was tracking Boyd, then Keller's collapse wasn't accidental. "Open the basement security storage," Pierce ordered. Keller kept backups down there. 2 officers exchanged uneasy glances. The basement hadn't been accessed for months. The door creaked open, the hallway dark and dusty, the smell of cold concrete lingering in the air. On the first shelf, they found Keller's second notebook. But right behind it, wedged between old equipment, was something no one expected. A sealed envelope with the deputy warden's name written on the front in shaky handwriting. And, inside it, something that changed everything. Deputy Warden Pierce held the envelope for several seconds before opening it, as if the weight of it had suddenly doubled. Keller's handwriting on the front was uneven, rushed, and unlike his usual neat officer script. Whatever he wrote fast and under pressure. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. No explanations. No dates. Just one sentence. If anything happens to me, it starts with Boyd, but it doesn't end with him. Pierce exhaled slowly. The basement lights flickered overhead, humming with age. Down in this forgotten part of Attica, every sound felt amplified. Footsteps, breath, the distant clanging of doors above them. The two officers beside him shifted uneasily. "Sir, is Keller saying Boyd attacked him?" one of them asked. "No," Pierce said. "He's saying something bigger is happening." They returned upstairs, but as they approached the main corridor, the radios on every officer's belt erupted with the same sharp message. Code Blue. D-block tension rising. Inmates refusing to return to cells. Pierce didn't run, but his stride quickened. When they reached the observation deck overlooking D-block, they saw the start of something dangerous. Dozens of inmates stood in the common area, not fighting, not yelling, just standing, watching the guards, waiting. A silent wall of bodies. "Who's controlling them?" an officer whispered. Only one person could. But Jerome, Boyd was still in interrogation, sitting calmly in a chair, hands folded, as if nothing outside concerned him. Pierce moved fast, pushing past officers and entering the small room. Boyd looked up, expression unreadable. "Something you want to tell me?" Pierce asked. "I'm in here," Boyd replied evenly. "Whatever's happening out there isn't me." It wasn't a lie. Boo's influence had always been subtle, often invisible. If he wanted to spark a coordinated refusal, he wouldn't do it while locked in interrogation. And yet, the timing was too perfect. Pierce took a seat across from him. Keller was investigating a network. Your name came up. For the first time, Boo's jaw tightened slightly. Keller talked too much, he said. Asked questions he didn't understand. What questions? Ones that get people hurt. Pierce leaned back. Did you hurt him? No, Boo said. But someone wants you to think I did. Outside the walls of the interrogation room, the noise changed. Not yelling, worse. Silence. Officers holding radios tighter. The kind of quiet that only meant pressure building. "Deputy," an officer called through the glass. "You need to see this." Pierce stepped outside. A live feed from the yard appeared on the monitor. A message had been carved crudely into the frost-covered ground using some sort of metal scrap. "Shift begins. Don't stop it." Pierce felt his stomach drop. Shift was the same word Keller circled in his notebook. Whatever Keller expected to happen, it was already in motion. "Where'd the metal come from?" Pierce asked. "Not sure, sir. We're checking inventory." As the officers reviewed footage, an anomaly stood out. 3 inmates from separate blocks had moved toward the same drainage area within minutes of each other, as if delivering something. Pierce returned to Boyd. "Tell me what shift means." Boo met his eyes, and for the first time, his voice carried a hint of warning. "Shift isn't a time, deputy. It's a person." "A person? Who?" Boo leaned forward slowly. "Whoever Keller found. Whoever wrote on your yard. Whoever wants you running in circles until they finish what they started." Pierce's pulse quickened. "Name." "Now." Boo exhaled. "You're looking in the wrong direction." Keller wasn't tracking inmates. He was tracking officers. That hit like a punch. Before Pierce could respond, every radio in the building crackled at once. "Deputy Warden, we've located Officer Keller's missing keycard. It's in the restricted access tunnel beneath C-block. And sir, there's fresh blood on the floor." The room went silent. Pierce looked at Boyd. Boyd looked back. And the implication was unmistakable. Whatever Keller uncovered, someone inside the staff didn't want it revealed. Something far worse than an inmate power struggle had begun. The restricted access tunnel beneath C-block was never meant to hold secrets. It was a service corridor, a forgotten artery running under Attica's oldest wing, lined with pipes, peeling paint, and a cold draft that carried the metallic smell of rust. But tonight, it felt like something else entirely. A burial ground for the truth Keller never got to share. Deputy Warden Pierce descended the narrow concrete stairs with 2 officers behind him, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. At the bottom, a smear of dark red streaked across the floor. Not a pool, just a drag trail, as if someone had been pulled deeper into the tunnel. "Keller," one officer whispered. Pierce didn't answer. He followed the trail. The tunnel curved left, then right, then split. The drag marks stopped at a graded vent. Someone had tried to wipe the blood, but not well enough. Pierce examined it carefully. "This isn't where he was attacked," Pierce said. "This is where he was moved." The radio on his belt crackled. "Deputy, D-block inmates are back in cells. Whatever that standoff was, it's over." Pierce froze. The timing was wrong. Too clean. Too sudden. Someone wanted attention redirected. Someone wanted them down here, away from the real plan. He turned toward the officers. "Call it in. Lock down the lower levels. No one goes in or out." But before the officer could respond, another voice broke through the radio. Tight, breathless. "Pierce, you need to get back up here. Now. We have an issue with Officer Daniels." "Sir, he's missing." Officer Daniels. One of the guards Keller worked with. One who had access to the same surveillance logs Keller had been reviewing. One who had been on shift the night Keller was found. Pierce didn't waste another second. He and the team sprinted up the stairs, through the corridor, and toward the command center. The air felt heavier now, tinged with something new. Fear spreading through staff who suddenly realized Keller wasn't the only one in danger. Inside the command room, Pierce was met by a cluster of officers around the monitors. One pointed at the screen. "Sir, this is from 3 hours ago." The footage showed Officer Daniels walking into the staff corridor behind B block. Normal. Routine. But then a figure stepped into view behind him, face obscured, hat pulled down, jacket zipped high. Daniels turned, confused. The figure raised something metallic. Not a weapon. A key. The lights in the hallway flickered. The camera glitched. And both men disappeared off-screen. "That's the last time Daniels was seen," an officer said quietly. Pierce studied the footage, rewinding it frame by frame. He leaned forward. Freeze. On the intruder's sleeve was a barely visible patch, half torn, but unmistakable. A correctional officer's uniform. Not an inmate. Someone on the inside. Pierce felt the realization settle, like ice. "Where is Boyd?" "In interrogation," an officer answered. Pierce moved fast. When he entered the room, Boyd was still sitting calmly, but his eyes lifted the moment Pierce walked in. "You find your shift yet?" Boyd asked. "You're going to tell me who inside my staff is doing this," Pierce said. Boyd shook his head slowly. "I told Keller the same thing. You're chasing shadows. You know more than you're saying." "I know enough to stay alive," Boyd replied. "And enough to know you're out of time." "What does that mean?" Boyd leaned forward, voice low and certain. "This isn't about me. And it's not about Keller. It's about Attica. Someone wants control. True control. And when you want control of a place like this, you don't start with inmates. You start with the people holding the keys." Before Pierce could respond, a deafening alarm erupted overhead. Breach in central control. Every officer froze. Pierce's radio blared again. "Sir, someone just accessed the master override system. Cameras are failing. Doors are unlocking. The entire prison is shifting." Pierce's blood turned cold. Boyd stood slowly from his chair. "Deputy," he said, "I told you. It starts with me. But it doesn't end with me." The sound of metal doors unlocking traveled through Attica like a rolling earthquake. Heavy, final, and terrifying. Central control was the heart of the prison. If someone breached it, they controlled everything. Cameras, gates, lockdown barriers, even which officers were trapped and which inmates were freed. Deputy Warden Pierce sprinted down the corridor, pushing through panic staff as alarms wailed overhead. The red emergency lights flickered, washing the concrete walls in pulses of crimson. Every instinct he had screamed that this was no longer a containment problem. This was a takeover. When he reached central control, the reinforced door was ajar, the locking mechanism forced open with a precision that didn't fit an inmate rebellion. Inside, the room was dark except for the glow of half-functioning monitors showing flickering feed loops. 2 operators were handcuffed to their own desks, unharmed but shaken. Pierce stepped forward. "What happened?" One operator pointed shakily at the control console. "He used your clearance, sir. He had your code." "My code?" Pierce repeated slowly. It had to be copied from your badge. Or someone you trusted. A chill worked its way through him. He scanned the room, searching for signs of forced entry, but the area was untouched. Whoever breached the system didn't need brute force. They had access. On one of the main screens, a feed suddenly stabilized. It was the staff corridor near the old administrative wing. Officer Daniels appeared in frame, alive, walking shakily, hands bound. Behind him was the same shadowed figure from before, the one wearing the torn correctional patch. But now, as the person lifted their head, the camera caught a clear angle. Pierce felt his breath stop. It wasn't an officer. It was Captain Reed, a veteran supervisor, a man who oversaw shifts, access points, and officer rotations for years. Keller's colleague, trusted, respected, and the one person who could have intercepted Keller's investigation before anyone else knew about it. Reed led Daniels toward the old parole hearing chamber, abandoned for years and sealed off except for special access. "Why'd he take him there?" an officer asked. Pierce steadied himself. "Because that room isn't covered by cameras. Reed knows every blind spot in this prison." He turned to his team. "Gear up. We're going in." They moved swiftly through the hallway maze, boots echoing as the alarms continued screaming overhead. When they reached the old administrative wing, the lights were out, the air colder than the rest of the prison. Pierce motioned for silence. They advanced. From inside the chamber came muffled voices. Pierce signaled the officers to flank the door. On his count, they pushed in. Captain Reed stood at the center of the room, Officer Daniels tied to a chair beside him. On the table was Keller's missing notebook, the original, not the basement copy, and a stack of printed access logs. Reed didn't look startled. He turned slowly, meeting Pierce's eyes with a strange calm. "Finally," Reed said. "I thought you'd never get here." "Step away from him," Pierce ordered. Reed raised both hands slightly, not in surrender, but in a gesture of resignation. "You don't understand what Keller found," Reed said. "He discovered the rot in this place. How decisions are made. How policies are twisted. How power really moves. I didn't silence him to hide a crime. I silenced him to keep Attica from falling apart." Pierce tightened his grip on his weapon. "You attacked a fellow officer. You breached central control. That's not protection. That's betrayal." Reed shook his head. Keller didn't understand the consequences. If he exposed what he found, the entire facility would have exploded. Inmates, officers, administration, everything. "And what did he find?" Pierce asked. Reed hesitated. "Ask Boyd." Pierce stiffened. "Boyd." Reed nodded. "He's not your enemy. He's the balance. The only reason Attica hasn't torn itself apart." Keller stumbled into the truth and panicked. "So I acted." Before Pierce could respond, a rustling sounded behind him. Officers turned, weapons raised. Jerome Boyd stood in the doorway, unrestrained. Calm. Watching. "Deputy," Boyd said, "I told you there were bigger forces at play." Pierce stared at him. "How did you get out?" Boyd nodded toward the breached control system. "Someone wanted me free." Reed exhaled. "Because without him, this entire place burns." For a long moment, no one moved. Boyd stepped forward, looking at Reed. "You handled it wrong." Reed's eyes dropped. "I know." Pierce finally spoke. "It's over, Reed." Reed nodded once, a tired acceptance settling over him. Officers moved in to restrain him. As they escorted Reed out, Boyd paused beside Pierce. "Attica isn't what it looks like on paper. You know that now." Pierce looked at him. "This ends today." Boyd gave a faint, unreadable smile. "Nothing ends in Attica." Later that night, after order was restored and central control was repaired, Pierce reviewed Keller's notes again. One line caught his eye, a question circled 3 times. "Who really controls the prison?" Pierce stared at it, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. Reed was in custody. Keller was in recovery. But Boyd was back in D-Block. Calm, quiet, in complete control. Pierce turned off the light and realized something unsettling. The officers held the keys. But Boyd held the prison. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for what comes next. Subscribe so you don't miss it.